So step 4, allocating the transaction price to the separate performance obligations. So basic principle is that we're going to recognize the amount of revenue that the seller expects to receive as a result of selling a good or service. And a contract can have a bunch of different performance obligations involved. We have to separate out the performance obligations and then assign some of the transaction price to each one, and then recognize the revenue as those performance obligations are performed. So in order to allocate, and we did this in the bean example in the video for Learning Objective 1, you can use the standalone selling price, and that's the best measure of, or the best way to allocate the selling price. And just to refresh our memories on this, this was where Bean offered the $2 discount on a cup of coffee when the customer bought a $12 bag of coffee beans at the same time. And so there's two separate performance obligations, because obviously the beans and the coffee can be sold separately. So we have to allocate this, the transaction price is going to be the dollar for the cup of coffee. It's usually a $3 cup of coffee. I didn't put that up here. It's usually a $3, but you get $2 off. So you're paying $1 for the coffee when you buy the $12 bag of beans. So you're paying $13. So now the standalone selling price, if you did it separately and there weren't the special going on, would be $12 for the beans and $3 for the coffee, $15. So to use this is the standalone selling price. To allocate it, you so go 12 divided by 15, 3 divided by 15. 80% of that 15 belongs to the beans, 20% to the coffee. And so then you just multiply it by the actual selling price, and you get the amount to allocate to each performance obligation. Okay, so that's using the standalone selling price. That's not always available, and so when it's not available, there's 3 methods that you can use, and these are in order of preference. I guess that's FASB's preference. You can use what's called the adjusted market assessment approach, where you're looking at possibly, you're trying to figure out what's the customer willing to pay for this, and you could look at competitors, what they're selling things for. So that would be the adjusted market assessment approach. Obviously, a lot of judgment calls there. You can also use the expected cost plus margin approach. You cost out how much is your performance obligation, what's the cost of it to you, and then add your normal margin to that. Then there's the residual. This is the least favorable, or the least favored one to use. If you know some of the standalone components, then if you don't know if you have 2 standalones you know and one you don't, you say, okay, the price is such and such. We know the standalone, the rest residual goes to the other one. Okay, so those are your. That's a little bit more detail on step 4, allocating the transaction price to separate performance obligations. So you've got the standalone selling price is the best to use. If that's not available, you go for one of those in order of preference. Okay, so step 5 is satisfying the performance obligations. Go to step 5 here. And so there's a few terms that you have to have solidly in your mind. Satisfy, that means that the customer has control of the good or service. Then we have to say, oh, okay, this sounds like a 2-year-old. It's like, oh, what does satisfy mean? Oh, well, what does control mean? Anyway, control, you have to know what control is too. That means, and they give a bunch of specifications for this. Basically, the customer has the ability to use the benefits of whatever it is he's bought and can prevent others from using it. And so they give indicators of control. Not all of these have to be met, but they're indicators that control is passed. The seller has received payment or has the right to receive payment. Legal title might have passed. Physical possession, the customer has the coffee. The customer has the significant risk and rewards of possession of this product or service, and the customer has accepted the asset. So you need to know what means we have to satisfy the performance obligation, and that has to do with when control passed. So you have to kind of be aware of what does it take for control to have passed. The performance obligations could be met at a point in time or over a period of time. And the point in time is obviously easy. They're done. You recognize the revenue. But if it's over a period of time, there's different ways that the revenue can be recognized. And so it can be measured sort of over time as progress towards completion, the timing of the revenue recognition. It can be recognized ratably. That just means sort of the same amount each time. So say you're you're renting a building to somebody, you're renting some office space to someone, and they have prepaid some rent. You can recognize that rent ratably each month as they get the use of the rental space. So that's generally, and if you're an insurance company selling insurance premiums, that you can also recognize the revenue as the premiums are used essentially. Okay, so that would be more or less a straight line where you'd be doing the same amount each month. There's also cost to cost. That would be more for your like construction contracts, where you're sort of matching the costs incurred to, you're going to how much the total cost is, how much of the cost have we incurred so far. Units of delivery. This is where you can say, okay, so we're expecting 100 labor hours. How many labor hours have we worked, or the tons produced or floors completed? You can use input and output methods. So I guess the the main point is the revenue is, if the performance obligation is completed at a point in time, you just recognize the revenue. Otherwise, you have to figure out sort of the pattern of that revenue recognition and come up with a sensible way to recognize it based on the economic reality underlying it. Okay, so that takes us through sort of the five-step process revisited. The next thing we get to, we'll be learning Objective 3, and that's just sort of, they call it revenue recognition issues. Yeah, so we'll look at a few issues. Okay.